Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into some really difficult but I think necessary subject matter. We're pulling insights from a powerful sharing by Pastor Hughes Jikang, which is based on Warren Wiersbe's writings, and it zeroes in on the book of Job, specifically chapters 16 and 17.
Yeah, this is definitely not a light subject, but it gets right to the heart of maybe the heaviest human experience, that struggle with immense, kind of inexplicable suffering, the kind that makes life feel, well, entirely meaningless.
Absolutely. And our mission today is to try and navigate that feeling, that absolute rock bottom, and see if we can extract some maybe surprising wisdom hidden there. We're focusing especially on how we're meant to process faith, trust, and this truly counterintuitive idea of, well, wisdom operating through unanswered prayers.
It really is about finding perspective when your whole immediate world has just collapsed. And I think to really get the insights, we first have to appreciate the sheer depth of Job's crisis as it's described in the material.
It's a devastating picture, isn't it? Despair, total isolation. Job wasn't just dealing with overwhelming physical pain, though that was bad enough. The sources really emphasized that his emotional, his psychological suffering was just amplified by the people around him.
Right.
His friends, the ones who supposedly came to comfort him, they pretty quickly turned into accusers.
They did. They showed up with a worldview that just didn't have space for random, undeserved suffering. They came with these preset assumptions, convinced that Job must have done something terribly wrong to deserve all this.
And that lack of genuine empathy, that failure to just sit with him in his pain, that's what turned their support into, well, basically torture for him.
Precisely. Their attempts at comfort were rooted in what the source calls legalism. And we should clarify, we don't just mean following rules here. It's more like a mechanistic, almost transactional view of God,
Like, if I'm good, God rewards me. If I'm bad, God punishes me. That simple.
Exactly that simple. And that kind of equation just completely breaks down when faced with real, complex human suffering. It just doesn't work.
So when Job's suffering didn't just magically disappear, they jumped to conclusions.
They did. They concluded he must be guilty, maybe hiding some secret sin. And this legalistic approach, totally devoid of compassion, it became this tremendous burden on Job. The sources even suggest it felt like emotional blackmail. It's like they refused intellectually to face the sheer severity of his actual blameless situation.
Wow. And meanwhile, Job himself was becoming, as the sources put it, an earthly joke. Physically just wasted away. God even referring to himself as just a shadow. His whole existence was just redefined by this agony.
He was completely broken. All his life plans, everything he'd built, utterly ruined. Described as turned to smoke. And this massive psychological and physical toll, it led him to a really desperate conclusion, which is referenced there in chapter 17.
Which was?
That the only escape, the only way out, was to abandon life altogether.
He saw death, reaching the place of the dead, as his only real hope left.
We should probably clarify for listeners, like you mentioned, when the text talks about the underworld, it's generally referring to Sheol, which in the ancient understanding wasn't necessarily a place of fire and brimstone, but more like a neutral resting place for all the dead.
That's a really important distinction. He wasn't necessarily thinking damnation, he was just desperate for rest, for non-existence.
Exactly, just removal from the agony. He saw the grave as the only possible deliverance from suffering. He was literally praying for death.
Okay, so the agony was that intense. How did the source suggest Job managed to push past that ultimate desire for escape then? Because here's the critical turning point in this whole discussion, right? Job prayed for death, but God did not grant his request, the divine refusal.
Yes, and this refusal, this denial, is absolutely key to understanding the deeper wisdom here. The analysis suggests that God had a more beautiful plan, a plan that Job, blinded by his immense pain, just couldn't possibly see at that moment. And this reveals a core principle, really, of how profound faith has to operate sometimes.
Hold on, though. If the plan was so beautiful, why let Job get that close to total breakdown? Psychologically, physically, doesn't the source kind of grapple with the ethics of allowing that extreme pain as part of the plan?
That's a fair and necessary pushback. The material addresses it by framing the test or the situation differently. The interpretation isn't that God was being cruel, it's that faith is required to operate precisely when the ultimate plan is completely hidden. We can't see the why. God wasn't denying Job out of cruelty, but actually out of long-term protection. He saw something Job couldn't see in himself.
Which was?
A spark of faith still remaining, deep down. A resilience Job himself couldn't even access at that point. and apparently that tiny spark was enough for God to deny the request for death.
So the refusal wasn't really a rejection of Job, it was more like an affirmation of a future he couldn't even imagine.
Exactly. The denial was, in a sense, necessary for the grander design to unfold.
And what was that grander design, according to the source?
Not just survival, it was complete vindication, full restoration, and eventually the doubling of everything he had lost. Had God granted his immediate wish, his prayer for death, Job would have missed out on that beautiful, ultimate restoration. He would have cut the story short.
Wow. That leads us straight into what feels like the most profound and definitely the most counterintuitive insight from the sharing. This idea of being thankful for the prayers God didn't grant. I mean, that challenges everything we think we know about prayer, right?
Yeah.
Aren't prayers meant to be answered?
It absolutely does challenge that. We're often taught, or maybe we just assume, that prayer works like a vending machine. You put in your request, you get your result, ask and you shall receive, full stop. But this concept forces us to confront the, frankly, severe limitation of our own human wisdom.
Right. It's like we're standing at the foot of a mountain, seeing maybe 3 feet ahead, but praying as if we understand the entire terrain and the best path to the summit.
That's a perfect analogy. We simply don't know what's truly best for us in the long run. The things we desperately pray for when we're in pain, or maybe even driven by ambition, might, if God actually granted them, lead us down paths with really severe unintended consequences later on.
So being grateful for unanswered prayers.
Yeah,
It's not just being resigned, like, oh, well, didn't get it. It's something deeper.
much deeper. It's described as an act of profound reliance, deep trust.
Trusting that divine wisdom, through the very act of denying our request, is either protecting us from some disaster we couldn't foresee.
Or maybe guiding us onto a path that, while harder now, is ultimately superior, better for our growth or our ultimate purpose.
I remember years ago, I desperately prayed for this specific job offer. It would have meant moving my whole life across the country. I was absolutely devastated when I didn't get it, just crushed. But then, maybe 6 months later, that entire company went bankrupt and dissolved. If I got that job, wow, I would have been unemployed in a brand new state with zero safety net.
And that's the core realization right there. Hindsight often shines a light on the protection that was hidden in the denial. It takes real humility and deep faith to look at our current suffering or disappointment and consider the possibility that the very thing we thought was a rejection might actually be a much better arrangement in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, but let's talk about the raw emotion in the middle of it all. When we're in the suffering, how does the source describe God's reaction when we're mid-crisis, maybe voicing really emotional struggles or even angry complaints about his plan? Does he just get angry back?
No, and this part of the analysis offers tremendous comfort, I think. It emphasizes that God does not meet our emotional outbursts, even the ones we might later regret saying, with immediate judgment or condemnation. He understands our weakness. He understands our pain.
So he meets us more like an understanding father, not like a prosecuting attorney.
Exactly. The source uses this very gentle metaphor of deafness. It's not literal deafness, of course. It means God chooses not to immediately hold every single emotional, despairing word against us. He chooses not to sort of pursue the matter legally or chastise us for venting in our darkness.
He becomes deaf to the complaint itself.
To the complaint, yes. But, and this is crucial, while he's choosing not to hear the complaint in a punitive way, he is simultaneously watching our wounds with gentle, loving eyes. He sees the pain behind the words.
That's a really powerful distinction. Choosing not to engage with the maybe temporary complaint while staying fully aware of the underlying hurt.
It speaks volumes about divine patience, doesn't it? And this patience is illustrated further with another analogy. The wise parent teaching a child math. If the child gets the answer wrong right away, the wise parent doesn't immediately scold or punish them.
No, they guide them.
Right, they guide. They might say, why don't you look at that problem again? See if you can spot where you might have gone wrong.
Which suggests that divine guidance is much more focused on the process and the relationship than on immediate, perfect correctness or reward.
Yes. The priority seems to be the learning, the growth, the maturing of faith through the struggle itself.
That growth process is actually the most valuable part in this view.
It seems so. But to really appreciate that growth, the source warns us about another trap we can fall into.
Okay, what's that?
The trap of comparison. Or maybe more specifically, the trap of feeling that my situation is absolutely the worst thing that could possibly happen to anyone, ever.
That's pretty natural though, isn't it? When you're in intense suffering, your world shrinks. It becomes very self-referential.
It is natural, absolutely. But the source actively pushes back against letting that become our entire reality. It compels us to broaden our perspective.
How so?
Well, it challenges us directly. Is your situation truly the absolute worst? It guides us to think about the vast majority of the human population. People living day in and day out with unstable or non-existent access to clean water, reliable electricity, basic medical care, even just physical security. When we intentionally look outside our immediate bubble, our own suffering, while still very real and valid, starts to take on a more relative scale.
And the source uses a concrete example to illustrate this shift, doesn't it? Something about a flood disaster.
Yes, exactly. It mentions the severe flood disaster that hit Taiwan's Hualien Township. Catastrophic damage. But what happened immediately after demonstrated the power of community and a wider perspective. Widespread aid poured in, volunteers arrived, reconstruction support came from all over the region. That narrative shows not just devastation, but also incredible human resilience and our deep-seated reliance on each other.
So the point of bringing this up isn't to minimize Job's pain, or our own pain for that matter. The source seems to validate that the pain is real.
Absolutely not minimizing it. The point is to reframe it. To see that our personal suffering, however intense, is part of a much wider tapestry of human experience. And by seeing both the reality of widespread hardship and the reality of mutual support and resilience, it can help pull us out of paralyzing self-pity.
And maybe foster a bit of gratitude for the resources or community we do have.
Exactly. It can shift our focus even slightly from just being the suffering receiver to potentially becoming someone who can contribute, even in small ways, to helping others. That's a huge mental shift.
That is a transformation, moving from total self-focus to having some capacity to look outward again, which in turn probably strengthens internal faith too. So bringing it all together, what are the practical final steps the source outlines for moving forward when we feel completely overwhelmed by darkness?
It boils down to a kind of dual action plan. It requires both internal commitment and external action. They work together.
Okay, what's the internal part?
Internally, the advice is clear. Do not retreat into just complaint. Don't run away from faith because it gets hard. That's the temptation, but resist it.
So instead of running away, we should actually draw closer.
Yes. Draw closer. Confess our weakness honestly. Be willing to say, I am weak. I feel like a weak child right now. And then, crucially, pray not necessarily for the circumstances to instantly change, but pray for strong, resilient faith to withstand the circumstances. To hold on to the absolute conviction, even when everything looks bleak, that He is a loving and faithful Father, even walking through that valley of the shadow of death.
And the external part, how is that internal strength supported?
Through community. That's the vital external piece. The source emphasizes the importance of group support, mutual care within, say, a church community or any supportive group. We're reminded that we're meant to be one family in faith, and we have a responsibility and also the privilege to share life's burnings to support one another.
Through things like regular gatherings, being honest about struggles, encouraging each other.
Precisely. So standing firm really requires both. That internal posture of submission, faith, even gratitude for hidden protection, and that external reliable community network. They have to work in tandem.
That makes a lot of sense, the internal and external reinforcing each other.
So what does this all mean? When we look at Job's journey and the wisdom that Pastor Hugh and Wiersbe distill from it, it tells us that even when life feels completely hopeless, when the pain seems utterly unbearable, we still have a profound choice.
A choice.
A choice to reject that simplistic, harmful equation of legalism. A choice to try and trust that there might be a hidden, grander plan of restoration, even if we can't see it. And a choice to adjust our perspective by engaging with both the suffering and the resilience of the wider human family around us.
It really comes down to leveraging faith, perspective, gratitude, and community.
Exactly. To move from crisis not just back to baseline, but hopefully towards growth.
That's a truly powerful synthesis from such difficult chapters.
Before we wrap up, I do want to leave you, our listener, with one final, maybe provocative thought to chew on. It's a kind of reflection exercise based on this whole idea of unanswered prayer. Think back, if you can, to a time of really great difficulty or crisis in your own life. A time when you had very urgent, very specific prayers or desires about exactly how that situation should resolve.
That challenging period that probably still stands out pretty vividly for many people.
Right. Now really try to imagine that those specific requests back then had been answered exactly as you wished at that moment. Play it out in your mind, then look at your life today. Ask yourself honestly, Would your life truly be better overall if those prayers had been granted precisely as you asked? Reflect on the possibility, just the possibility that there might have been unseen protection or a better unforeseen arrangement hidden in that denial. Maybe it forced you onto a different path that ultimately resulted in greater long-term strength or wisdom or some unexpected blessing you wouldn't trade now. Let that recognition, if it resonates, perhaps inform how you approach your current difficulties and desires. It's just something to mull over.